Everyone had already begun walking toward the ballroom doors when the woman I had spent 20 years trying to forget caught my wrist beneath the bright afternoon sunlight pouring through the hotel windows. Her fingers were trembling. Her smile had disappeared. And before I could ask what was wrong, she leaned close enough for me to feel her unsteady breath and whispered the 7 words that shattered every excuse I had built my life around. "I never married because of you." For a moment, the laughter of our former classmates faded into a distant hum. Chairs scraped against polished floors, sunlight glowed across half-empty tables, and the reunion banner hanging above the stage moved gently in the breeze from an open terrace door. Yet all I could see was her face. Marissa Vale, the girl who had once known every dream I was afraid to say aloud, stood before me with tears gathering in her gray-green eyes. She looked older than the 17-year-old girl I remembered, of course, but there was still something painfully familiar in the way she pressed her lips together when she was trying not to cry. I had imagined seeing her again hundreds of times, but never like this. Never after everyone else was leaving. Never with my heart beating as if it had been waiting 2 decades for this exact moment. Before we continue, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Ancient Truth if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet miracles that happen when people finally find the courage to speak from the heart. My name is Julian Mercer, and until that afternoon, I believed some people entered our lives only to teach us how to lose them. I had arrived at the reunion shortly before noon, almost turning my car around twice before reaching the old school's renovated event hall. The invitation had remained unopened on my kitchen counter for 3 weeks. I finally attended only because my younger sister told me that avoiding the past did not mean I had escaped it. She was right, but I hated admitting it. I had built a respectable life in another city, working as a civil engineer, managing large projects, living in a clean apartment with framed photographs of mountains I had climbed alone. People often described me as dependable, calm, and successful. None of them knew that the calmness had been built from silence, or that my independence was partly another name for fear. The reunion was held during the day because the school grounds overlooked a lake that looked especially beautiful in the afternoon. White tables had been arranged inside the glass-walled ballroom, while former classmates gathered on the terrace beneath pale blue umbrellas. The sunlight was warm but not harsh, and the surrounding trees cast shifting patterns across the stone paths. Everywhere I looked, people were comparing photographs of children, discussing careers, laughing about teachers, and pretending the years had not changed them as deeply as they had. I smiled when expected, shook hands, and answered questions with practiced ease. Then I saw Marissa standing near the refreshment table in a soft blue dress, listening to someone speak while sunlight caught in her dark auburn hair. She looked across the room at the same moment I looked at her. There was no dramatic music, no sudden silence, no sign from the universe. Just 2 people freezing in the middle of an ordinary afternoon because the past had recognized them. Her expression changed slowly, beginning with surprise and ending in a small, uncertain smile. I returned it, though my chest tightened so sharply that I had to look away. For 20 years, I had convinced myself that whatever existed between us had belonged to adolescence. Seeing her again proved that some feelings did not disappear. They simply learned how to survive without being acknowledged. Marissa and I had grown up 3 streets apart. We met when we were 12, became inseparable by 14, and spent most of high school pretending our friendship was simple. She was bold where I was cautious, hopeful where I was practical, and effortlessly kind in a way that made people feel remembered. Her mother ran a small flower shop near the library, and Marissa often helped there after school. I would sit behind the counter doing homework while she trimmed roses and complained about customers who wanted apologies arranged in expensive bouquets. On summer afternoons, we rode bicycles to the lake, bought lemonade from a roadside stand, and spoke about the futures we imagined. She wanted to become an art teacher. I wanted to design bridges. We promised to leave our small town, see the world, and never become strangers. The promise failed before graduation. My father lost his job during our final school year. The stress changed him. He became withdrawn, angry, and ashamed, while my mother worked extra shifts at a nursing home to keep the bills paid. I began working evenings at a warehouse and stopped spending as much time with Marissa. I told myself I was protecting her from the chaos in my home, but the truth was more complicated. I was embarrassed. I feared she would look at me differently if she saw how frightened I was. Every time she asked whether something was wrong, I insisted I was fine. Every time she tried to get closer, I stepped farther away. Then I received a scholarship to a university several states away. Marissa was the first person I wanted to tell, but before I could, I learned that she had been accepted into a local art program and planned to remain near her mother, whose health had begun to decline. The difference between our paths terrified me. I assumed distance would destroy us, and rather than risk hearing that she did not feel what I felt, I made the cowardly decision to leave first emotionally. During the final weeks of school, I became cold. I avoided our favorite places, answered her messages late, and allowed rumors to spread that I was interested in someone else. At graduation, she waited for me beside the old oak tree behind the gymnasium. I saw her standing there in her white dress, holding a small wrapped box. I knew she wanted to speak. I also knew that if I walked toward her, I might confess everything and abandon the future my family was counting on me to pursue. So I turned away. I left town 3 days later without saying goodbye. For years, I told myself it had been necessary. I convinced myself that love at 17 was not real enough to build a life upon. But whenever I achieved something important, she was the first person I imagined telling. When I graduated from university, I searched the crowd knowing she would not be there. When I designed my first pedestrian bridge, I remembered the afternoons when she had sketched impossible structures in the margins of my notebooks. When my father died 10 years later, I nearly called her because she was the only person who had known who he was before disappointment hardened him. I never made the call. Inside the reunion hall, Marissa and I spent the first hour avoiding each other. I spoke with classmates I barely remembered while remaining painfully aware of where she stood. Eventually, our former history teacher gathered everyone for a group photograph on the terrace. By chance, or perhaps by the careful cruelty of fate, Marissa stood beside me. Our shoulders touched. Neither of us moved away. The photographer kept asking people to squeeze closer, and Marissa quietly laughed when someone behind us stepped on her shoe. That laugh pulled me backward through time so suddenly that my eyes burned. After the photograph, she asked how I had been. It was a simple question, but neither of us knew how to answer it honestly. I told her about my work, the cities I had lived in, and the projects I had completed. She told me she had become an art teacher at a middle school 15 minutes from where we had grown up. She had cared for her mother through a long illness until her mother passed away 6 years earlier. She still lived in the same town, though the flower shop had been sold. Her life sounded full. She spoke warmly about her students, her garden, and the community art program she had started. Yet I noticed she never mentioned a husband or children. I wanted to ask, but I did not have the right. Throughout lunch, we sat at different tables. The sunlight moved slowly across the ballroom floor as speeches were given and old photographs appeared on a projector screen. One photograph showed Marissa and me painting scenery for the senior play. In the picture, she had blue paint on her cheek, and I was looking at her instead of the camera. The room filled with laughter and teasing. I smiled with everyone else, but Marissa lowered her eyes. That was when I began to understand that our silence had not been painless for her either. Later, I stepped outside and walked toward the lake. The afternoon was bright and clear, with small boats moving across the water and families gathering near the shore. I stood at the railing, trying to decide whether to leave early. Marissa found me there. She said she had often wondered whether I hated her. The question stunned me. I told her I had never hated her, not even for a moment. She asked why I had disappeared. I gave her the explanations I had rehearsed over the years: family pressure, fear, distance, immaturity. They were true, but incomplete. Finally, I admitted that I had loved her and had been terrified that she did not love me enough to choose a difficult future. Her face changed when I said it. She looked toward the lake and remained silent for so long that I thought I had ruined everything again. Then she told me about the box she had carried on graduation day. Inside it had been a sketchbook filled with drawings of the places we planned to see together. On the final page, she had written that she loved me and wanted to try, even if distance made it hard. She had waited beneath the oak tree for nearly 2 hours. The shame I felt was almost physical. For 20 years, I had believed I was the only one who had been afraid. I had imagined that leaving protected me from rejection, when in reality it had created the exact loss I feared. I apologized, though the word felt pitifully small. Marissa said she had hated me for a while. Then she had missed me. Then she had learned how to live without expecting me to return. Her honesty hurt, but I deserved every part of it. We walked back toward the reunion hall together, speaking carefully at first, then more openly. She told me about the relationships she had tried to build over the years. There had been kind men, serious proposals, and moments when marriage seemed possible. Yet each time, something inside her resisted. She had told herself she was too focused on her mother, then too busy with teaching, then simply happier alone. She never said that I was the reason. Not then. By 4 o'clock, the reunion began to end. Families gathered belongings, classmates exchanged numbers, and staff cleared empty glasses from the tables. I helped an old friend carry boxes to his car, delaying my own departure because I did not know how to say goodbye to Marissa again. I feared asking to see her after the reunion because 20 years of regret did not automatically earn me a place in her future. She had built a life without me, and I had no right to arrive suddenly and ask her to rearrange it. When I returned to the ballroom, only a handful of people remained. Marissa stood near the windows, holding her purse and looking out at the bright grounds. I approached her and thanked her for speaking with me. I said I hoped we might stay in contact, but even as I spoke, I could hear the caution in my voice. It was the same caution that had ruined us before. She nodded politely. I turned toward the doors. That was when she followed me, caught my wrist, and whispered that she had never married because of me. I stared at her, unable to breathe properly. She immediately shook her head as if she regretted saying it. She explained that she was not blaming me. She had lived a meaningful life, made her own choices, and did not expect me to repair the past. But every time someone asked for her whole heart, she discovered that a part of it was still waiting beneath that oak tree, holding a sketchbook for a boy who never came. I wanted to tell her that she should have forgotten me. I wanted to say I was not worth the years she had carried. But those words would have been another form of running away. So I did something I should have done 20 years earlier. I stayed. I told her that I had never married either. There had been relationships, but whenever closeness required vulnerability, I withdrew. I had spent my life building bridges for strangers while refusing to cross the distance between myself and the person I loved most. I told her I did not expect forgiveness, and I did not expect us to become the people we once imagined. We were no longer 17. We had scars, responsibilities, routines, and entire histories the other had not witnessed. But I asked whether she would allow me to know the woman she had become. Marissa began crying then, not dramatically, but quietly, with tears slipping down her cheeks as sunlight surrounded us. She said she was afraid. I told her I was afraid too. For once, neither of us used fear as a reason to leave. We walked outside after everyone else had gone. The reunion staff folded tablecloths behind the glass walls while the afternoon remained golden and warm. We followed the stone path to the oak tree behind the old gymnasium, which still stood despite everything that had changed. Beneath its branches, Marissa opened her purse and removed a small, worn photograph. It showed the two of us beside the lake during our final summer of high school. On the back, in faded ink, she had written, "Some people feel like home before you understand what home means." She had carried that photograph for 20 years. I did not promise her forever beneath that tree. Promises had once been too easy for us. Instead, I asked whether she would have coffee with me the next morning. She smiled through her tears and said yes. It was a small beginning, but real love often returns quietly. Not with certainty, but with two people deciding that honesty is worth the risk. The following months were not effortless. I lived 3 hours away, and my work required frequent travel. Marissa had a classroom full of students who depended on her and a community rooted deeply in the town. We argued about distance, old wounds, and whether our reunion was genuine love or nostalgia dressed in beautiful memories. There were days when I almost retreated into silence again. There were moments when she expected abandonment before I had done anything wrong. Healing did not happen simply because we finally confessed the truth. But this time, we spoke. I learned to tell her when I was overwhelmed instead of disappearing. She learned to ask for reassurance without pretending she did not need it. I visited her classroom and watched her encourage shy children to paint without fear of mistakes. She came to see one of my bridge projects and stood beside me during its opening, smiling as people crossed something I had helped create. We visited the flower shop her mother once owned, and Marissa cried when the new owner let us stand behind the old counter. Slowly, we stopped trying to recover the years we had lost and began creating days that belonged only to the present. 1 year after the reunion, on another bright afternoon, I took Marissa to the lake. I brought the same kind of lemonade we had shared as teenagers and a new sketchbook wrapped in brown paper. Inside, I had placed photographs, train tickets, pressed flowers, and small reminders from our first year back in each other's lives. The final page was blank except for one sentence: I cannot redraw the past, but I would be honored to create the rest with you. I asked her to marry me beneath the daylight, with families walking nearby and birds moving across the water. She did not answer immediately. She pressed the sketchbook to her heart, looked at me with tears in her eyes, and let the silence hold everything we had survived. Then she nodded. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who still believes love can return after years of silence, and subscribe to Ancient Truth. Your support helps stories about forgiveness, courage, and second chances reach people who may need them more than we realize. Marissa and I married in the garden behind the school on a clear Saturday morning. There were no extravagant decorations, only white flowers, wooden chairs, and sunlight streaming through the trees. Several of her former students painted small signs for the aisle. My sister stood beside me and cried before the ceremony even began. Marissa walked toward me holding the old photograph inside her bouquet. When she reached me, she smiled in the same uncertain way she had smiled across the reunion ballroom, except this time neither of us looked away. Special request: please comment real love finds its way home if you believe some hearts deserve another chance. People often say timing is everything, but I no longer believe that is entirely true. Timing matters, but courage matters too. We lost 20 years because we were young, frightened, and convinced silence would protect us. It protected nothing. Yet those years also taught us what love requires: not perfect circumstances, not dramatic promises, but honesty offered again and again. Sometimes the person you never forgot has been carrying the same memory. Sometimes the door you believed had closed was only waiting for you to stop walking past it. And sometimes, when everyone else is leaving and the room is nearly empty, life gives you one final chance to turn around, listen closely, and choose not to run.